model plan. My name is Marlis Richardson, and I'll be your moderator from the Contracted LIHEAP Technical Assistance Team at Brilliant. Our speaker today will be Yulia Razad from the Office of Community Services. As a reminder, this call is being recorded and will be available on the LIHEAP Performance Measurement website at a later date. You are currently in listen-only mode. After dialing into the webinar, you should have entered your access code and the audio pin located in your control panel. That audio pin is important as it enables me as your moderator to unmute your line so that you're able to speak on the call. When it's time for questions and answers, you may enter your questions into the question box in your control panel, or you can click on the raise hand icon, and at that point I will unmute your line. Please note that we will be holding the questions and answer section at the end of the presentation. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Yulia.
Thanks, Marlis. So today we're going to talk about the model plan. As you all know, each year, in order to receive LIHEAP funds, you have to submit a model plan in OLDC by September 1st. And it's really important that you have a well-drafted model plan in place, not only to tell us, the funder, what you plan to do with the money we will be giving to you, but also to tell your constituents and your clients how the program is going to be administered. Next slide, please. So we're going to do a brief overview. We'll review the sections of the LIHEAP model plan. I will go through some new functionality in OLDC called cloning a report, and then we will have a question and answer session. Next slide. Next slide. So it's very important to have an accurate and consistent model plan so that your clients, your constituents, everyone in your state that receives LIHEAP services understands how the program is operated. A good, well-developed model plan can set clear guidelines for how funds are spent and what clients can expect when they receive services. And it is also a great way to get feedback from your community on your plans for administering the LIHEAP program. Next slide. Did you know a grantee's model plan should be an up-to-date reflection of what is actually taking place in the LIHEAP program? So when you're developing your model plan, please keep in mind that you should be completing the form to describe what your actual plans are to administer the LIHEAP program. You shouldn't be putting in what you would like to do or what you hope will happen, but what is actually either happening currently and that you plan to extend to the following year, or what you are planning to accomplish with your LIHEAP funds for that particular year. Please know that we are very flexible, and if something happens in the middle of the fiscal year, once your plan is approved and you want to change something about your LIHEAP program, you're able to file a plan amendment in OLDC through the revision feature. Next slide. So the model plan has about 20 sections, and all of these sections are listed in OLDC in the table of contents for the model plan. There's sections that address each component of your program, heating, cooling, crisis, weatherization, as well as other aspects of program administration that are required by the LIHEAP statute, such as outreach, coordination. Next slide. Information about how you talk to energy suppliers, program and fiscal monitoring, public participation and fair hearings, Assurance 16 activities, as well as some program integrity and training activities. Next slide. There's also built into the plan all of the certifications that previously had to be submitted as attachments. They're now all part of the plan. So the certification regarding debarment, the certification regarding a drug-free workplace, and the certification regarding lobbying are all typed into the plan, so you don't have to retype them or find them on our website. Please note that the certification for lobbying is something that only states need to complete. Tribes are not required to submit the certification regarding lobbying. It will still be part of your plan, but you don't need to check the box at the bottom of that section that says that you consent to that certification. Next slide. So there's questions in every section and that you need to complete. Most of them are required. In cases where the questions are optional, they're very clearly marked optional. There are also some sections that are required just for states and not for tribes. In those cases, the sections at the very top will say very clearly that they are only required for states or only required for states in the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. So please do pay attention to that. The rest of this presentation, we will highlight some of the questions that you need to respond to and think about when submitting a model plan. Next slide, please. So in the first section, we talk about program components, and this is where you tell us about the types of assistance you plan to provide with LIHEAP funds, your heating program, your cooling program, crisis, weatherization. You are required to provide either a heating or cooling program, and you're also required to provide a crisis program. Weatherization is optional. You do not need to do both heating and cooling, but you are required to do one of those. You cannot have just a crisis program using your LIHEAP funds. Next slide. We also ask you to allocate your funds among the components for your program. So between heating, cooling, crisis, weatherization, any planned carryover that you might have, administrative costs, Assurance 16 activities, and funds used to develop and implement leveraging activities. We understand that these are estimates, and we do not hold you to the exact amount in the model plan, but we do ask that if your budgeted allocations begin to vary significantly from what you submit in your model plan, that you provide a plan amendment through the revision process in OLDC and update those numbers. Similarly, when you receive a weatherization waiver, if you request one to go over 15% for weatherization, you should submit a plan amendment in OLDC through the revision process to update these allocations so that we can see where you took the extra money from, which component received less money, so that you can increase the percentage for weatherization. Next slide, please. There's also a section of questions in section 1 about categorical eligibility. We ask you if you plan on practicing categorical eligibility, and if so, which of the programs listed below you plan to implement: TANF, SSI, SNAP, or selected means tested veterans programs. It is not a requirement that you use categorical eligibility, but if you do plan on doing so for any of your components, you do need to list that in your model plan. Next slide, please. We also ask you to define countable income. First, for every component, we ask you about the income threshold. So we want to know if you're going to use the federal poverty guidelines or the state median income and what your threshold will be. Next slide, please. And then we ask you which kinds of income you use as countable income in terms of defining eligibility for LIHEAP. The federal government does not set a standard for what shall be counted as countable income for LIHEAP eligibility determination. That is up to each grantee. And that question, I believe it's question 1.9 in section 1, lists a very long list of various types of income, many more than are listed on this slide. Here are just a few that you may want to think about when it comes to making those decisions. For Social Security Administration benefits, think about whether you plan on including or excluding the Medicaid deduction. Think about whether or not you plan on counting cash gifts or loans that need to be paid back. What about balances in savings accounts or one-time lump sum payments such as rebates or credits or winnings from lotteries? Think about what you plan to do with income from members of the household that are under the age of 18. Will you be counting that income, or will you be requiring that income be counted if the child is not otherwise a full-time student? Think about funds received by the household to care for a foster child. Will you be asking to count that income? What about income tax refunds or receipt of child support? These are all decisions that you get to make as a grantee, and we ask in the model plan that you tell us specifically what kinds of things you count when you are determining income eligibility. Next slide, please. There are very specific sources of income that cannot be counted because there are restrictions for those programs set into federal law. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, benefits cannot be counted as income. Neither can benefits from the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, or Children, also known as WIC. The value of free or discounted lunches from the National School Lunch Program cannot be counted as income. Neither can non-gambling related tribal per capita payments for up to $2,000 per person per year. If the per capita payments are sourced from gambling, then they can be counted. Lastly, federal student aid for education, such as grants or loans to undergraduates, cannot be counted as part of your countable income. Some of these are included in the countable income checkboxes in question 1.9. They are there to make sure that our staff can catch if you are not following the prescriptions of these various federal laws. You may not be aware of them. So if you check that you're counting some of these, our staff will get back in touch with you and explain the regulations to you and ask you to revise your plan, because there are federal laws that require that you do not count these as sources of income for eligibility determination for LIHEAP. Next slide, please. So did you know that if you decide to include cooling assistance, you can, midway through the year, you can edit it into your model plan? We understand that things change, and you may have a plan to not provide cooling assistance, and your model plan can be approved without a cooling component. But then, you know, you could be like Montana is right now, where it's over 100 degrees in the summer, right now in Montana, and Montana's looking at their plan going, you know what, I think we need to provide cooling centers as part of our cooling program. And that wasn't in their plan before because they weren't expecting it to be over 100 degrees in Montana this summer. So responding to the needs of their community, they decided they wanted to provide access to cooling centers, which is an allowable cost. And you absolutely can do that. We understand things can change. You just need to do a revision to your model plan in OLDC and let us know about it. You don't need our advance permission in order to make these changes, but you do need to submit an amendment to your model plan before the end of the fiscal year. Next slide, please. So sections 2 through 5 cover the different types of assistance. In section 1, when you list the program components that you plan to administer with your LIHEAP funds, say you're only going to be doing heating assistance and crisis, you then need to fill out the sections related to heating and crisis. If you check off that you're going to be doing heating, cooling, crisis, and weatherization, well, then you need to fill out sections 2, 3, 4, and 5, one section for each type of assistance. Next slide, please. So for each type of assistance you provide, you need to answer the following questions. Do you require an assets test for eligibility determination? Do you have additional or differing eligibility policies for renters versus owners? Do you give priority in eligibility to elderly, disabled, young children, or households with high energy burdens? What variables will you use to determine benefit levels? And what are the minimum and maximum benefits? And will this include in-kind benefits such as blankets, space heaters, or fans? These questions repeat in sections 2, 3, 4, and 5. You need to answer them for each section as applicable, depending on whether you're offering that type of assistance with your funds. Next slide, please. When you're filling out the section on crisis assistance, which everybody must fill out because holding a crisis component is required, you also need to consider a couple of additional questions. First, you need to define crisis and life-threatening crisis. Those must have two separate definitions because they have two separate response time frames, 48 hours for crisis and 18 hours for life-threatening crisis. You need to decide if your crisis assistance program is going to be seasonal or if it's going to be year-round. Do you plan to only offer it in the winter and in the summer, or do you plan to offer it during the entire year? If you're providing heating or cooling equipment repair and replacement services through the crisis program, you need to mention that to us as well. We'd like to know if you are doing just heating equipment or heating and cooling equipment or just cooling equipment or none of those at all. And you also need to tell us if there are any additional eligibility requirements for crisis assistance that are different from requirements for heating or cooling. Next slide, please. If you plan to provide weatherization assistance, there's also a couple of questions specific to weatherization that you need to answer for us in Section 5. You need to tell us who will be implementing the weatherization program, whether that's going to be your office or a different department, a different part of the state. If there is a separate monitoring protocol for weatherization, we'd like to know about it. We also need to know what weatherization rules you'll be using, whether that will be the Department of Energy weatherization rules, LIHEAP weatherization rules, or a mix of the two. And we want to know what kind of weatherization measures you will be providing using LIHEAP assistance. Next slide, please. Section 6 of the model plan talks about outreach. Next slide. And here you want to talk about all of the different ways that outreach is conducted to let people know about the LIHEAP program. This should include outreach done by you as the grantee, but also outreach performed by your partners and by your subgrantees. So if subgrantees are performing outreach activities, that should be included in this section. If utility vendors are performing outreach activities, like doing bill inserts, that should be included in this section. If you have other community partners, other departments in the state government, all of that information should be included here. We'd like to know all of the different outreach activities that take place to let people know about LIHEAP and the services that are available. Next slide. Section 7 talks about coordination, which is the way that you coordinate LIHEAP services with other similar services that your clients may be eligible for. Next slide. When you coordinate with other programs, what do? How do you help clients qualify for as much help as they can or as they need? Do you have a joint application that can be used for multiple programs, like one application for utility assistance and weatherization? Do you accept or give referrals to or from other programs? Are the referrals automated? Can you send information from that your client provides you to another program directly electronically? We'd also like to know if you operate intake centers that are kind of like one-stop shops, so a client can go in and apply for multiple programs all in one place. Those are just a few examples. Anything else that you do in terms of coordination that aren't covered in the examples that are listed in this section for you to check off, you can always put in the text box at the bottom of the section. Next slide. The section on agency designation tells us a lot of information about what kinds of organizations are operating various aspects of the LIHEAP program. Next slide. This section should only be completed by state grantees and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Tribal grantees and the other territories, not including Puerto Rico, do not need to complete Section 8. They can skip it entirely. We ask you questions about the categorization of your agency in terms of what kind of work it primarily does. Is it the Department of Commerce in the state? Is it the Department of Human Services? Is it the Department of Environment? We also ask ask you what kinds of organizations perform various work when it comes to the administration of the LIHEAP program. Who determines eligibility? Is that done at the state level? Is it done by subgrantees? And if it's done by subgrantees, what kinds of agencies are those? Are they nonprofits? Are they community action agencies? Are they Native American tribes? Are they city or county governments? We ask similar questions for other activities related to LIHEAP, such as processing benefit payments for regulated utilities or for bulk fuel vendors. We also want to know what kinds of agencies do the installation of weatherization measures. Next slide, please. There's an entire section of the LIHEAP plan dedicated to energy suppliers, or energy vendors, as we call them in the program. These are the utility companies and the bulk fuel companies that you deal with to make sure that your clients get to keep their heating and cooling resources. Next slide, please. We need to know what you do with your energy suppliers to ensure that they receive and process the payments properly, to make sure that they are properly crediting them to the accounts of the people you have deemed eligible. We want to know if you're making payments directly to those energy suppliers or if you are paying the clients directly. It is not a requirement to pay energy suppliers directly. We understand that there are some situations where it is necessary to pay the client rather than their energy company, but we recommend that in most cases you try to pay the energy supplier rather than the client. Next slide, please. We also want to make sure that you are ensuring that the energy suppliers treat LIHEAP households fairly and adequately. We do not want them to be mistreated or charged more based on the fact that they're receiving LIHEAP assistance, and it is a requirement of the LIHEAP statute that as the grantee, you assure that clients are not being treated unreasonably or unfairly. So we ask you in this section how you ensure that this happens. Next slide, please. Section 10 of the model plan talks about program, fiscal monitoring, and audits. Next slide. And here we really want to know about the various things you do to ensure that the program is operating as you intend it to be. We want to know what your what kind of audit you receive as a grantee. Do you get are you audited under the Single Audit Act and in accordance to the new OMB Uniform Administrative Guidance? We also want to know about your monitoring practices in terms of assuring that the program is operating effectively and efficiently, and if you have subgrantees, that they are following the procedures that you set out for them. Next slide, please. We want to know if you do internal program reviews, if you do file sampling, what kind of monitoring trends you see, if you monitor through a central database. We'd like to know if you have any subgrantees that are currently that are on a corrective action plan. We also want to know what your monitoring schedule is. If you monitor less than 100% of your subgrantees, we'd like to know how many you plan to monitor in this upcoming fiscal year, what that schedule is going to look like. We'd also like to know your monitoring protocols, the methods you use to monitor your subgrantees. Next slide, please. Did you know that fiscal year 2016 LIHEAP funds will need to be monitored in compliance with the Uniform Administrative Guidance issued by the Office of Management and Budget? Are you ready to do that? We're going to be having a webinar on this topic later this summer. But please, if you're not already familiar with the Uniform Administrative Guidance, we did issue an information memorandum on the topic. You can look that up on our website. And fiscal year 2016 LIHEAP funds will be subject to the requirements of this guidance. Next slide, please. Section 11 of the model plan talks about timely and meaningful public participation. We're really focusing on the meaningful part of this public participation. We want to make sure that this is not just a pro forma bureaucratic exercise, that people truly are given the opportunity to comment on the formulation of the model plan, and that those comments are taken seriously into consideration when the model plan is developed and submitted to our office. Next slide, please. So your LIHEAP plan is only as good as it is able to meet the needs of the people that you are serving. So in this section, we'd like to know how you get input from the public, from your clients, from the people who represent their interests in the development of your program administration and your LIHEAP plan. There are different ways to solicit public input and public participation. State grantees are required to hold a public hearing, which is a formal process. Tribal grantees and territories are not required to hold a hearing, but are still required to solicit public participation. This can happen through various means. You can have a tribal council meeting. You can post a draft version of the plan on your website or make it available at your office for comment. You can solicit for comments through newspapers or newsletters, or on the radio through public service announcements. The most important part here is to ensure that people are aware of the fact that you're soliciting input and that they have a meaningful amount of time in which to provide that input. We don't want to, OLDC will not let you submit the model plan if you put in a hearing date that is in the future. You have to have a hearing held, or your public participation has to occur before you submit the plan. We do not like to see people holding public hearings the day before the plan is due or a week before the plan is due, because realistically speaking, you will not have enough time to consider all of the comments that you receive at these hearings or through this public forum and meaningfully use that information to develop your program and change the way your model plan looks. So we really want this process to be taken seriously and to be performed in a way that allows for as much participation from the public at large as possible. Next slide, please. The LIHEAP statute requires that you have a process for fair hearings. And that process should be described in Section 12. Next slide. When an application is denied or is not processed in a timely manner, the LIHEAP statute requires that the LIHEAP applicant be given the right to an appeal. So this section asks you how you inform applicants of their rights to an appeal, and when you inform them of these rights. Do you give them a pamphlet? Do you describe the appeal rights in the LIHEAP application itself? Is there a poster in the intake office that lists the process? Is it written on the approval and denial letter? Next slide, please. It's very important to tell clients what information will be required as part of the appeal process. They need to know what they have to do in order to submit an appeal, what information they have to provide to you, and under what circumstances the appeal can be filed. Next section. So did you know that printing appeal rights on just the approval or denial letters does not meet the requirements of the LIHEAP statute? This is because clients must know their appeal rights in case they choose to appeal because the application is not processed quickly enough. If a client feels their application is not processed in a timely manner, they have the right to an appeal. But if they only read about their appeal rights in the approval or denial letter, they're not given adequate opportunity to appeal based on an application being processed in an untimely fashion. They must be able to do this prior to the approval or denial of their application. So providing appeal rights in just the approval or denial letter does not meet our requirements. They must be provided in some other way as well. such as a separate pamphlet or brochure or information provided through your website or through the LIHEAP application itself. Next slide, thank you. Section 13 of the plan talks about your Assurance 16 activities or activities that you perform to reduce home energy needs. Next slide. Here we're asking you what you do to reduce the need for energy assistance so that you can use more LIHEAP funding for as many clients as possible, because as all of you know, we are not able to serve every single eligible household. Assurance 16 activities are optional, but if you do choose to allocate some of your funds to Assurance 16 and you indicate so in Section 1, you will be required to fill out the section and tell us how you plan to use those funds, what kinds of activities you plan to engage in, and what impact you are hoping that these activities will make. If you performed Assurance 16 activities in the prior year, you will also need to answer questions about what impact those past activities had, what outcomes were achieved, and how many households were served. Next slide, please. Section 14 of the plan talks about the Leveraging Incentive Program. This program has not been funded in several years, but if we do decide to provide funding for leveraging, if Congress appropriates funds for leveraging and we're able to do that, you will be required to have completed this section in order to apply for the program. So it's always good to fill this section out just in case we solicit applications the following year. Next slide. And in this section, we're asking you to tell us what you do to collaborate with other programs and seek additional funding that is not federal funds and coordinate those resources for your LIHEAP clients. The plan asks what kinds of non-federal resources you plan to leverage, and it asks you how you collect that information if you're claiming resources leveraged by third parties, such as your local agencies or your utility companies. And it's really important to fill this out just in case, even if we haven't been funding the program, we never know what Congress is going to do. So we really encourage you to fill this section out. Otherwise, you may have to go back and do a plan amendment, or if the fiscal year is already over, you won't be able to do a plan amendment, and you may not be able to participate in the program when we start to solicit applications. Next slide, please. We have a pretty lengthy section in the model plan on training. It's section 15. Next slide. And here what we want to know is the kinds of training you provide to three types of people, to the staff and employees of your organization, to your local agencies or subgrantees if you have them, and to your utility vendors. Tribal grantees do not need to complete the section on local agencies because they do not have subgrantees, but they are required to complete the sections on grantee staff and on utility vendors. And what we really want to know are three things. We'd like to know how often you will provide training. We want to know if your training is formal or informal. And we want to know where this training is provided. These three sets of questions repeat for each group of people, staff at the grantee level, staff at the local agency level, and staff at the vendor level. Next slide. Section 16 on performance goals and measures is another section that is only required for states. Territories and tribes do not need to complete this section. They can, it is optional, but it is not required. States are required to complete this section. Next slide. And really this section is one big question, and what we want to know is what you are doing to prepare to report the required LIHEAP performance measures. If you are able to report on all of the measures, we'd like to know that. If you're able to report only partially, on some of these measures. We'd like to know that as well, and we'd also like to know what your plan is to get to a place where you're able to report on all 4 measures. We do provide technical assistance through our contractor Apprise for performance measurement reporting. If you need this technical assistance, please get in touch with Apprise, or you can get in touch with me and I will put you in touch with them. Next slide, please. Finally, the last kind of big chunk of the model plan is the program integrity section. This used to be a separate form called the Program Integrity Assessment Supplement. We no longer have a separate form, and we incorporated all of the information from that form into this section and made it all more canned checkboxes rather than free form writing. Next section. We want to know about a whole host of different information that about the practices that you have to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, and to verify identities of clients, validity of vendors, and to ensure that the information you are collecting is accurate. So some of the information we ask about is about utility vendors. We want to make sure that you are verifying that the utilities you're working with are legitimate businesses, and we would like to know how you go about doing that. Do you check the Better Business Bureau? Do you ask them to complete a W-9? Do you check the State Attorney General's consumer complaints or website of list of businesses in good standing in your state? Next slide. We also like to know how you verify and document that clients are legitimately in need of LIHEAP and are eligible to receive the services. We need to know how you document the identity of your clients. Do you ask them for a Social Security card, for a state or tribal issued ID, or for birth certificates? We also want to know if you ask them for proof of their physical residency to make sure that they are providing a bill for utility services at a place that they actually live. Next slide, please. We'd like to know what documents the applicant is required to provide in order to prove eligibility. What kind of income documents are required? Do you require pay stubs? Do you require award letters? Do you require a form if a client claims that they have 0 income? Are they asked to sign a statement or a form asserting to that claim? Next slide, please. We also want to make sure that privacy is protected. We all deal with personally identifiable information in the LIHEAP program, and it's very important to keep that safe and away from people who would use that information for ill. So we'd like to know how the release of information is handled, if there is such. We want to know what safeguards you have in place in your databases, or if you're storing physical files. Are those in cabinets that are locked? Are they in a separate place where clients can't just walk by and grab client files with other people's information in them? And we'd really like to know what kinds of procedures you have in place for investigating suspected fraud. What procedures do you have in place, if any, when you find out that there is an allegation of fraud? What do you do? And if you do make a determination that a client has committed fraud, are there further steps that you take related to future eligibility? Next slide, please. There are documents required for you to submit with the model plan as attachments in OLDC. Next slide. If you are having your model plan certified by someone who is not your governor or tribal chairman, you are required to attach a delegation letter from the governor or tribal chairman. If you need a template for this delegation letter, please get in touch with your LIHEAP liaison. They'll be happy to provide you with one. If your tribal chairman or governor has changed from last year, you will need a new delegation letter. It's really important to make sure you have updated letters. We will not accept last year's letter if the governor or tribal chairman has changed. If you're operating a heating component, you need to submit a benefit matrix. If you're operating a cooling component, you also need to submit a benefit matrix for that as well. You need to submit minutes, notes, or transcripts from your public hearing if you are required to hold one. All state grantees should be submitting some kind of evidence of their public hearing. If you are a tribal grantee and you are working on developing a policy manual, we are happy to take a look at what you've got, to review it and make suggestions. Feel free to make that attachment as well. It's not a requirement, but it will be an easy way for you to get information over to us. And then we'll be able to compare your policy manual with what you're putting in your LIHEAP plan and help you work out all the kinks. So if you're working on a policy manual and would like our feedback, and if you are a tribal grantee, please feel free to provide that attachment as well. We'll take a look at it and get right back to you. Policy manual work will not be tied to the approval of your model plan. It will not hold up your funding in any way, but it will be an easy way for you to submit that information to us. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk about a new feature in OLDC called cloning. This is a feature that allows you to take information from your fiscal year 15 LIHEAP model plan and transfer it to your fiscal year 16 model plan. That way you won't have to retype all of the same information again, and you can just go through and make updates and edits to places where you've made changes. Next slide. So the first thing you have to understand about the cloning process is that it will only work if you have not already started working on your 2016 plan. If you've opened your 2016 plan, you will not be able to clone. You'll need to delete out whatever you have in your 2016 plan so that there's no record of it, and then you can go through this cloning process that I will describe shortly. Next slide. So you log into OLDC, and once you do that, you click on Report Form Entry in the top left of the screen, like you would to do any report. Next slide. Then you get this screen where you are asked to make program and grantee selections. This is where you select yourself as the grantee, you select LIHEAP as the program, and then as the form, you select the model plan. Then you click the blue Enter button. Next slide. This will then take you to a screen where you need to select the year of the report you'd like to work on. You should select the fiscal year 2016 option, which will be the one at the very top, 10/1/2015 to 9/30/2016. And after that, in the drop-down box where it says Select Action, you should click on Clone Report, select that, and then click the blue Enter button. Next slide. Once you've done that, it will ask you which report you want to copy. And here you should select the fiscal year 15 plan, because that's what you want to copy into 16. So here you will select the second option from the top, and it should be 10/9/2014 to 9/30/2015. So select that button, and then click the blue Enter button again. Next slide. And once you've done that, you will get a pop-up that says clone is completed successfully. If you get a different message, that means you weren't able to clone successfully, and most of the time the reason for that is because you have already started working on your 2016 plan or somebody has opened it. So if that's the case, go into your 16 plan, make sure you delete it out of OLDC, and then try the process again. And you can always contact one of your liaisons or contact me if you're having troubles. So if you have done this successfully and you get this little pop-up, you need to click OK. And then once you do that, your 2016 plan will come up on the screen. Next slide, please. It is important to save your 2016 plan before you exit. So once you've cloned successfully, you hit the OK button, and you're looking at your 2016 plan, go into any section of the plan and click the blue Save button. And once you do that, that will save the information in all of the sections, and you will be able to come back to the plan later and make the changes that you need to make. If you close OLDC before doing the save feature, you will lose the cloned information and your 2016 plan will remain blank, and you'll have to go through this process all over again. Next slide. Please understand that while it is important to us that you are able to clone the report and transfer information from one year to the next, we do expect that you will read through the entire plan and update any questions that need to be updated, where you've made changes or where information needs to be updated just because of the nature of the question. So here on the screen are listed at the minimal questions that you absolutely need to update to provide an accurate and up-to-date response. They're located in section 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. They're usually questions that have to do with what you plan to do next year specifically, or what you did the previous year specifically. Please make sure you look at all of these questions and you update these questions. But please also make sure that you go through the whole plan at least once and update any other question you feel is necessary in order to submit to us an accurate representation of what you plan to do with your fiscal year 2016 LIHEAP program. Next slide, please. Before we move on to the question and answer session, I would like to also point out that we've received several inquiries from grantees who are sometimes having problems saving information in their plan. So they'll update a response and then click Save in OLDC, but the information isn't actually saved. It remains unchanged or remains blank. If you're experiencing this problem, it is most likely because you are not using Internet Explorer set to compatibility mode. We have a guide on how to do that with your Internet Explorer. You can contact your liaison and they will send you step-by-step instructions for how to put Internet Explorer in compatibility mode, and that should clear up any problem that you may have with saving in OLDC. And with that, we will open the lines for questions.
Thanks. This time we do have one question. Sharon Gamble, I will unmute your line so that you may ask your question directly. Your line is unmuted.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Julia. That was a lot of good information. And my question was regarding the delegation letter. We, earlier in the year, we got a new governor this year. No political comment. And we sent over a request for a new delegation letter, and the governor's office responded to us saying that unless our previous governor had rescinded his authority, then it was still valid, and they would not give us a new letter.
That's not our position, and if you need that from us in writing, we'd be happy to provide it. You should just send that request to your liaison.
Okay. Okay, I'll do that.
Will do.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, if you do have a question, please use the question pane and enter it in, or you can use the raise your hand icon and I will be happy to unmute your line. I do see another hand raised. Katrina Campbell, your line is unmuted.
Hi. I just wanted to know on this that we went over. Real quick. On the part we were talking about the per capita, it said in there that it says you are required to use for income. It says that non-gambling per capita, 2,000 per person, cannot be counted.
Yes.
Is that referring back to, like, because the last webinar I had, we were discussing that, and they were supposed to get back to us, and which I never did get anything on that, because they were saying that per capita distribution from gaming revenues should be included in income, and that's what we were doing. But then they said, she goes, I'm not really sure. So she said, okay, land trust per capita is not included. So then I got confused, and so we were waiting to hear back. I never did hear back. And
okay, so here's the rule. The rule is not about what should be included. The rule is about what cannot be counted. And you cannot count per capita payments up to $2,000 per person per year if the source of that per capita payment is not gaming.
Okay. So ours is basically gaming, but if we're getting per capita from another source like land trust or something
then you cannot count that up to $2,000.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. That's what I wanted to clarify because I wasn't sure. And I also wanted to know how we get a hold of these webinar slides and information on them after the fact.
Sure. They're posted on the performance management website. I can send you out a link. It'd be easiest if you contact, what tribe are you with?
Berry Creek Rancheria.
Berry Creek. So your liaison is Joji Rago-Adia. If you send her an email, she can send you a link to that website. You need a username and password to access it, and she can help you figure out what your username is and get you an account set up. And the webinars are posted there. Right now, we have 2 of our 4 webinars posted up there, but eventually all of these will be.
Okay, yeah, see, I didn't know who my contact was. I just started this. We transferred people, so that's why I'm like totally lost.
All right, I will ask her to give you a call. Berry Creek, right?
Yeah. What did you say her name was again? Her name is
Joji, J-O-J-I-E, and her last name is R-A-G-O, Rago-Adia, A-D-I-A. And all of the contact information for all of us is on the ACF LIHEAP website. So if you just Google ACF LIHEAP, the first thing that comes up is our website, and there is a link on the left that is called DEA Staff Contacts, and all of our contact information is on there, along with what part of the country each person is responsible for.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So in addition, we had some other questions along that line about getting the slides. So if I understand it correctly, it is important for the individual to get in touch with their liaison. Is that correct, Julia? If they need a sign-on to get to that performance measurement website?
Yeah. We can share the actual PowerPoint presentation with everyone who registered for this teleconference, for this webinar, because we have their email addresses. And then if you did not register and we don't have your email address, you can get the recording once it's posted. And if you still really need that PowerPoint and you didn't receive it, get in touch with your liaison and they can share the PowerPoint with you as well.
Thank you for that. We also had another question from Mike Kelly. He asks, can we get a copy of the fields and the sections that must be updated?
Yes, the fields and the sections that are updated are actually listed in the model plan action transmittal that we just recently issued. It's on our website in the section called Action Transmittals. I think it's Action Transmittal number 3 for fiscal year 2015, and all of those exact set of questions are duplicated there.
Thank you. Okay, so Karina Ortiz, your line is now unmuted.
Yes, I have a question on income that cannot be counted. Would scholarships fall under the federal student aid?
What I listed are sources of income that cannot be counted because there's a federal law that specifically prohibits them from being counted. And in terms of scholarships, it's only student aid, so loans or scholarships that are either issued or secured by the federal government, so through the Department of Education. You have the flexibility to establish additional rules as the grantee for countable income. So if you want to also exclude scholarships from other sources, you are able to do so. That is at your discretion.
Okay, so if here on the tribe, if they get a scholarship, a tribal scholarship, then it would be up to us whether to accept that income or not?
Yes.
Okay.
And you need to include that in question 1.9 of the model plan.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Our next question comes from Tiffany Robinson. Tiffany, I have unmuted your line so that you may ask your question directly. Tiffany?
You hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. I just want to make sure I understood that as far as the delegation letter, that there's no need to submit another one if it's the same person from last year?
There's no need to get a new letter. Please, though, attach it still. Even attach last year's letter. The attachment is required. It does not have to be a different or new letter.
Okay.
Like it can be the same one you submitted last year, but you still have to attach it.
Okay. Attach last year. Okay.
And Katrina had a follow-up question. Katrina, I have unmuted your line.
Okay. Yeah, it was just regarding the matrix worksheets. That was another thing we had went over in the last one. I wanted to know, would that be on that website you were mentioning?
The matrix worksheets. Oh, that you were given at our national conference? What matrix worksheets?
Well, they were discussing it at the last webinar regarding how, because some people didn't know what we were talking about. We were talking about the guidelines you got to be in. And so she started talking about the matrix for the heating and the cool for the LIHEAP people.
So you are required to have a matrix. If you need help developing a matrix, you should contact your liaison and they can help you with that.
Okay.
And there are samples of matrices from other tribes and other states that you can take a look at, and that's on the LIHEAP Clearinghouse website. And there you don't need a username and password. I would just Google LIHEAP Clearinghouse, and it's the first thing that comes up.
Okay, thank you.
Our next question comes from Dennis Correa. Dennis, I have unmuted your line so that you may ask your question directly. Dennis, are you there? I can ask Dennis' question as he's typed it into the question pane. For applicants that receive Social Security, get a gross amount X, but receive a different amount after automatic medical discounts. With the gross amount, they do not qualify, but after the medical deductions, they may be qualified. Can this after discount amount be considered as real gross income?
It is up to each grantee to decide whether or not they're going to count the gross amount of the Social Security benefit or the net amount after the medical deductions are taken. We ask you in the model plan which way you're going to go, but you can make the decision yourself. It's up to you whether or not to count it.
Thank you. Dennis, if you have a follow-up question, just let us know. Margot Wright has a question, and I have unmuted your line, Margot.
Yes, maybe it was in previous webinars, but how exactly are funds distributed? How do you decide how much the organization or tribe receives?
Tribal allocations are either based on an agreement that the tribe has with the state in which the reservation is situated, or based on data that we collect from the American Community Survey. If you would like more detailed information on that, I would recommend that you contact me offline and I can go into much greater detail.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Margot. The next question comes from Lee Ivinson. Lee, your line is unmuted.
Thank you. Lee Ivinson with the Little River Band of Ottawa Indians here in Manistee, Michigan. I have a question about the leveraging provision. We have a tribal low-income energy assistance program that provides assistance for basically the same thing, the heating, electric. Can those funds be utilized in the leveraging portion of LIHEAP?
Yes.
And I'm sorry, I have another question to add to that. The guidelines that we utilize are not the same as LIHEAP. Can it still be used as leveraging?
It depends. When you fill out the actual leveraging report, when we solicit the applications, there's various criteria that you have to meet. Sounds like you will probably be able to meet at least one of those criteria, but I would want to talk with you offline to go through the specifics of your program, and we can make a decision.
Okay. That's fair. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Terry Ross, your line is unmuted.
It is 12:30 p.m. in Arizona. Did we start already or ending or?
We are in.
Oh, we are.
I logged on at 11:30 and it said that Pacific Mountain Standard Time is 1 hour ahead of us or behind us.
Were you not able to log on, Terry, to the webinar? Was there a problem logging on?
No, there was a confusion on the time.
Yeah, I was online for about 15 minutes, and so I thought, okay, then I'll call back at 12:30, and I'm sorry. Can we get copies of the handout?
Yes, we will send a copy of the PowerPoint to everyone who registered for the webinar.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Sorry about that, Terry. Thank you. Ray Whitcomb, I am trying to send you your audio pin. I'm unable to mute your line, but I do see your hand is raised. So if you can enter your audio pin, I'll be happy to unmute your line, or you may type in your question in the question pane, and I can read it directly. Yulia, we do have a question for Margot Wright asking for your contact information.
Okay. My email address is yuliya.rZAD@acf.hhs.gov. And Marlis, if somebody can type that into the box, that would be great.
Sure, I'm going to see. Emily, can you type that in to the entire audience? I am going to unmute Tiffany's line again. She had a follow-up question. And if Emily is not available, I will be happy to type that in. Tiffany, your line is unmuted again to ask your additional question about federal Pell Grant. Perhaps, maybe you already asked that. I wanted to make sure.
Yeah. This is Tiffany.
Was that the one you already, was that what you already asked, Tiffany?
Well, I just wanted to be clear with the federal Pell Grant and the federal student loan from the U.S. Department of Education. Can any of that, after their books and tuition have been paid, are the refunds counted in any way, or none of it should be counted?
I believe that none of it should be counted, but if you send me that question specifically in email, I will confirm that.
Okay, good, because we need that answer.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
And I do have the question from Ray Whitcomb. Can health care benefits be deducted from gross income?
That's up to each grantee to decide. There's no federal requirement one way or the other.
Okay. And Ray, if you have a follow-up, just let us know. And Dennis has a follow-up question. I have unmuted your line. Dennis Correa. Dennis, are you there? Okay. I will ask the question. Here in Puerto Rico, we have a public hearing and publish the dates of the hearings on Mayor local newspaper. We are required to have the public hearings, or we can publish the model plan on Facebook website or any other way different to the public hearing. Oh, he's asking the question, are we required to have the public hearing, or can we publish the model plan on Facebook website or other different way to the public hearing?
Dennis, I believe Puerto Rico is also required to have a public hearing, but I will confirm that and get back to you myself. I have your contact information.
Thank you. And Emily, thank you. Emily did post Yulia's contact information in the chat pane, so everybody should have that in writing in case they need that information. I'm not showing any additional hands raised, although Katrina's hand is still raised. Katrina, I've unmuted your line. Did you have an additional question, or was your hand just raised from the previous question?
Oh, that was from the previous, sorry.
That's okay. Karina Ortiz, same question. Did you have anything additional, or was your hand just still raised from the previous question?
From the previous question.
Okay, thank you. And the last one was Lee Ivinson. Lee, did you have an additional question?
Actually, I thought I didn't, but I do.
Okay.
Can we go back to the notification of the appeal process? In that notice to give to our clients, did you say that we have to give them the specific instructions of how long we have to respond to the appeal?
And what they said is, if it's the same person from last year, then we don't need to send a new one. But
So I believe Tiffany's line seems to be still unmuted.
I just muted it. I had left it unmuted. I apologize.
Oh.
Alrighty. So Lee.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So your question was about the fair hearing notification.
Correct. And do we need to have, because what we have, we actually have it right at the end of our application, the right to appeal, but we don't have the specifics. Like, we don't have on there that we will respond to an appeal request within 5 days. That's our process.
Right. You don't need to put all of the specifics of your appeal process there, but what you do need to do is tell the client how they can avail themselves of the process. So the application should say something along the lines of, if you feel your application has, you know, if you'd like to appeal, if you feel like it's not being processed in a timely manner, or if you were denied and feel that that was inappropriate, you can contact blah blah person at blah blah phone number or email address and request to exercise your appeal rights. And then once a person does that, then you can inform them of the whole process.
Okay. Okay. That's pretty much what we do.
Alrighty.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew Freed, I am unmuting your line now. I see you had a question.
Yes, I was just wondering if the tribes had to have a public hearing to meet the notice request.
No, tribes are not required to have a public hearing, but they are required to solicit public participation in the development of the model plan. So you have to get people's input. It just doesn't have to be through a public hearing specifically. It could be through other means.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, at this time I see no additional hands raised or additional questions. If you do have a question or you would like to speak, please use the raise your hand icon or ask the question in the question pane. I see nothing additional, Yulia. Nope, actually I do have one more hand raised. It looks like Lee's hand was raised again.
Hi. I just had one last question, and it speaks to training vendors. In that training, to what extent do we have to give the vendor training on our LIHEAP?
This can be as simple as having a conversation. It kind of depends on how many vendors you have, how good your relationship is with them, and how familiar they are with the program. You know, this could be an annual meeting that you may have with all your vendors, or each of your vendors individually, saying, hey, just a reminder, LIHEAP's getting ready to go again. Here are the rules. Don't forget you need to sign a vendor agreement. you know, you can do this over the phone. You can have an actual meeting if you wanted to. It's just to make sure that everybody is aware of your process, what your expectations are, and how everything is supposed to work, so that you're not working out kinks in the middle of winter when, you know, time is of the essence.
Okay, all right. Yeah, we pretty much do that one-on-one with them because we don't have that many vendors. Yeah.
And that's fine.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, our next question is from Carlene Taylor. Carlene, your line is unmuted.
Okay, thank you. As a follow-up just to that question asked about the vendors, I mean, we have vendor meetings across our state, but very few show up. So, I mean, a training I would think should involve most of our 300 plus vendors. However, when we send out the vendor document, we do have a cover memo that outlines, you know, all the requirements and changes, if any, from the previous year. So I guess that would constitute as being a training.
Yeah, I mean, we're using the word training loosely here. But yes, that's what, so you should describe that process when you're answering the question.
Okay, and then as a follow-up question, you talked about the public hearing requirement, and that the public hearing should be held with adequate time given for changes to be made as a result of discussion at the public hearing. In Connecticut, the public hearing is done through our legislative committees of cognizance. We can't set the date for the public hearing. There are certain requirements. They have a certain number of days after the governor releases the proposed plan to do the public hearing. And it's upon their approval, the plan is submitted to HHS. So, you know, they have the public hearing and they determine, you know, they can make changes if they wish, but the final is their say for when the, you know, what goes in the plan before it's submitted to HHS.
Okay.
So, you know, this might come 3 days before it's due. But I mean, does that protocol allowable in terms of where you're saying we do have, you know, the public can attend and they can provide, you know, testimony, and the legislatures can, based on those testimony, make changes if they wish.
And they make them on the spot?
They make and vote on the spot. Usually, very, very few instances it might happen. It might occur the following day because all the committees have to be present to vote on the plan.
Well, so the requirement is that the hearing be held before the plan is submitted. Which is
done.
Which is the way that works. Everything else are our recommendations. So in your case, you will not be able to have it far in advance because the process is out of your hands, and I understand that. But, you know, perhaps before your governor releases the plan, you can do other means of public participation to solicit public input outside of this, you know, very formalized bureaucratic process. There's nothing that keeps you from putting a draft watermark on your plan and posting it on your website and seeing what people have to say.
Probably, you know, there are certain things set in place, and maybe we can discuss it offline, like, you know, we cannot do anything until the governor officially releases a plan, for example. We do have meetings before with our advisory board, and there are people that represent the public that are present on the board. I mean, it's not the public themselves.
No, I understand.
Such,
and you can describe, that's something that you should describe in the public participation section of the plan.
Okay.
Okay, Carlene, thank you. If you have any additional questions, just let us know. Patty Smith, your line is unmuted. Patty, can you hear us?
Oh, yes. I'm referring back to the notice of fair hearing and the application not being processed in a timely manner. Who determines what's a timely manner? I mean, is that defined by the state or?
So that is not specifically addressed in the LIHEAP statute. So as is the case in almost all answers to my questions, it is up to the grantee. We recommend that you set a standard so that your clients know what to expect and are able to decide whether or not to submit an appeal if that specific time is exceeded. So our recommendation is that you make that decision for yourself and inform your clients of what that decision is.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Patty. If you have an additional question, please raise your hand or use the question pane. At this time, I see no additional hands raised. And I see no additional questions at this. Okay, we have 9 minutes left before the end of the webinar session. Again, if you do have a question, please use your raise your hand icon or the question pane. Yulia, I see nothing else at this time.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope this has been a productive and helpful webinar. If you have any more specific questions, please feel free to contact me directly. We will see you all in a little while for our upcoming webinar on the Uniform Administrative Guidance. Thank you.